Welcome to Reconnect, the show that focuses on Christ amongst the world's religions. The root meaning of religion is to reconnect. Here lies the purpose and goal of religion, reconnection with the divine. All religions except Christianity demand that we work to reconnect with the sacred. Only Christianity has God stepping into human history to redeem sinful man. It is through faith in Jesus Christ alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship with God the Father. Reconnect us, O Lord. Welcome to the inaugural show of Reconnect. I'm your host, Andy Rasman. I'm a world religions and Christian apologetics teacher at Crean Lutheran High School in Irvine, California. To see more of my work in these two subject fields, check out andyrasman.com or contradictmovement.com. Studying what other religions teach and preparing to defend the truthfulness of God's Word play a huge component within the church's call to make disciples of all nations. But sometimes it's hard to communicate this truth in faith conversations, especially when words might have different meanings to the skeptic and to the Christian. Today's guest, Bill Foster, will help in this process by sharing with us 4 common types of skepticism to the Bible's message of salvation through faith in Christ. I discovered Bill by searching the apologetics section of my local Christian bookstore. His book, Meet the Skeptic, A Field Guide to Faith Conversations, popped out to me. The spine had a collection of symbols on it, a peace sign, a yin and yang symbol, a Darwin fish, and what I call the bad religion symbol. Yeah, the band Bad Religion, because I've seen them use this symbol quite a bit on their albums. It's a cross in a circle with a slash through it, kind of like the no smoking sign. So it's basically saying no Christianity is the way I interpret it. I was thinking, okay, these symbols must be representing different types of worldview objections to the gospel message, and since it was called a field guide to conversations, I thought this would be really good to connect with Bill to just see what these symbols are and how it relates to conversing with skeptics. Bill's on the phone with me now, but before I bring him in to talk with us and to teach us more about conversing with skeptics, I want you to be as excited to hear from him as I am. Bill is a Christian apologist, teacher, and presenter to adult, college, and teen audiences. But this isn't what he is trained to do academically. He has a BA in English and an MFA in graphic design. While at graduate school, Bill was confronted by an array of colorful but anti-biblical worldviews for which he had few answers. So essentially, out of necessity, he had to go to the books on his own to become an informed representative of his faith. And he has immersed himself in the study of defending the gospel ever since. So I think he has a lot to offer to us in this regard, since he has come to this from personal experience and having to use this firsthand to defend his own faith, and obviously to share the good news with others. Bill has put together numerous visually driven and pop culture laced presentations to address some of the commonly heard attacks against the Christian faith, and he's been sharing these for the past 15 years at various churches and college campuses. He's also the owner of a brand image and design firm that helps him understand how the popular culture perceives and is influenced by the ideas that shape our world. Again, Bill Foster's book is called Meet the Skeptic, and his website to see more is fosteronfaith.com. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be on with you.
All right, before we dig into Meet the Skeptic, I want to have a get-to-know-you question. I noticed in your book that you quoted a couple of dialogues from Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So I was curious, are you a Star Wars fan?
I'm not a Star Wars geek. I guess I'll clarify it that way. I do like Star Wars, but some of the quotes just stood out to me and my wife and a couple of our friends when we were watching the movie.
Okay, cool. We'll come back to the conversation you quoted, but I'm just curious, of the ones you've seen, which would you say is the best movie of the Star Wars universe?
I'd have to go with Empire Strikes Back.
All right, how come?
I think that one was the best all-around movie. I think the last 3, the newer ones, which are actually the earlier ones in the series, were not very well written. And but Empire Strikes Back had a collection of things. There was a transition piece in the movie. You get to see Yoda. You get to see more Darth Vader, that kind of thing. So just thought that was made it the top one.
Awesome. I actually agree with you on that. I think the special effects are up there as being better. I just really like the end too. At this point, it shouldn't be a spoiler because if someone hasn't seen it yet, there's probably a problem. But I just really love the end where Luke's like, "No, I will never join you, even if you are my father." Right? And he's just like, "I'd rather die than join forces with you." So on that one, at least he wasn't a moral skeptic, which is something we'll get into soon because that's one of the types of skepticism that you bring up. So with your book, who is a skeptic? What do you mean by this term?
Okay, as far as my purposes go, a skeptic would be anyone who does not have a biblical worldview.
Okay.
Skeptics can be all flavors. To a Muslim, we would be a skeptic. But for us, for Christians, I would say anyone who does not hold a biblical worldview.
Okay, awesome. So this is a very broad field. We could be talking about atheists, agnostics, deists, Muslims, as you said.
And churchgoers.
Oh, churchgoers too. Okay, awesome. Because I guess we struggle with doubts about our faith too, right?
Exactly. There was a statistic I think I have in my book from Barna that only about 9% of the people out there believe in things like fundamentals, like that there is absolute truth, the Bible is accurate in all of its teachings, Satan is an actual being, good works don't get you to heaven. If they believe all of those types of things collectively, they have a biblical worldview. But a lot of people will have 2 or 3 of those that they may not fully believe, even though they go to church and claim to be Christians. Right.
So as Jesus said, narrow is the road, and few find it. So with that idea then, to help narrow our field, to make it easier for us, my understanding your book is to help us to not get into a sparring match, which I think can sometimes happen with apologetics when we're defending the faith. You answer one question, you get another one back, and you just keep deflecting back and forth. You found 4 types of skepticism that are very common, and the idea then is to pull out or unroot the weed of the skepticism. So those types of skepticism, spiritual skepticism, moral skepticism, scientific skepticism, and biblical skepticism. And what I'd like to do is just hear briefly from you on each of these. Maybe first then spiritual skepticism. What type of objections would be spiritual in nature?
They would include things like there are many paths to heaven, find your inner voice, follow your feelings, ask the universe for what you want and it will give it to you. Or it could, and that's sort of a self-made spirituality, but it could also include formal religions that are non-Christian religions. Buddhism, follow the Eightfold Path. Islam, follow the 5 pillars. That's spirituality as well. It's just formalized.
Gotcha.
Those are all spiritual skepticisms.
Okay, good. And so with spiritual skepticism, what's the best approach then in a conversation? Like you just listed some of the objections. If we hear those and we recognize, okay, there's this spiritual skepticism here, what's the best approach then, like to unweed the skepticism?
What you want to do, it's really three basic steps, and that is think in 4 categories. In other words, think, okay, I'm going to probably run into one of 4 types of skepticism, the 4 that you named, rather than I'm going to run into hundreds of different types of objections, because you can put those objections into groups, into those 4 groups. So think in 4 categories. Identify words or clarify words and dig up root ideas.
Okay.
And so if you hear a word that is a little vague to you, just ask for a clarification on that. What do you mean by that? What I hear you saying is, if you say, I'm not a Christian, but I'm enlightened. What do you mean by enlightened? Unpack that for me.
Right.
So now you're speaking the same language. You're not trying to answer something they're not asking. And from there, no one is going to have an answer to everyone's objection. So the idea is to try to get underneath that objection and say, okay, you're bringing up some interesting points, but I think what the big idea behind most of what you're saying is that good works get you to heaven. I mean, we can debate our religious ordinances and practices and rituals all day long, but ultimately, if I'm going to convince you or you're going to convince me. The big question is, how do I get there? How do I get to that final destination, heaven or paradise or nirvana or whatever it is? So that's the key question, the root idea. Good works get you to heaven.
Okay, awesome. And then you just got to try to pull out why that's not the case.
Right. You would ask something like what I call a probing question, like how good is good enough? That would be the one that would directly address that root idea. How good is good enough to get you to heaven? If you're honest with yourself, it would have to be a much better standard than this life.
Right.
So just how good does it have to be?
Okay, good. So it's kind of showing them the law, and as a mirror, the law is showing them that they've fallen short, even of whatever their religion's adherents may require.
That's right.
Pretty cool. In your book, something I really like about it is that it gives red flag words for each of these types of skepticism, which, like you were saying, like you hear key words and, what does that mean? Like you actually define these from these different points of skepticism. And one of them within the spiritual category was organized religion, which you say to the skeptic means a narrow, dogmatic, hypocritical system. And you give the example of Oprah Winfrey saying, I took God out of the box because I grew up in the Baptist church and there were rules, belief systems, and doctrines. God is a feeling experience, not a believing experience. If God for you is still about a belief, it's not truly God. And at first glance, I personally would have thought Oprah is rejecting her Baptist upbringing because of the organized religion, because of the hypocrisy she maybe saw in the church. But what I like is you point out that authority is the root problem here. Could you explain that in more detail, and how would you then approach her objection knowing that the problem is authority and not hypocrisy?
Yeah, I think most people struggle with the authority part because, really, is organization the problem? Is it a problem that we have a budget and that we have to keep the lights on and that we meet at a certain time each week? Those types of things. Organization, is that really the issue, or is it that it's not the organization that I set up? In other words, I'm not over it. I didn't decide what these tenets, these beliefs are. So this is some authority that I feel like is being forced on me. That would be probably the way they would say it. Whether or not it's being forced on them or not. I think the word underlying that is conviction. Maybe they're being convicted by it, and they don't like that feeling. That's uncomfortable. So if it's not their own system, what they're struggling against is the authority of it. And it may be uncomfortable and or intimidating to them to walk into a church and, feel like that they're surrounded by a lot of people who are self-righteous and hypocrites. That's a good red flag word there. And that these people are probably not living up to what they're saying in this church, and so why should I?
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. And then from there, I'd like to move on into the next type of skepticism, which in your book, the order is moral skepticism. What type of objections would be moral in nature?
Those would be moral skepticism is a lot about wordplay, and it's a lot of self-defeating types of things, like truth depends on your perspective. The quick retort would be, is that your perspective?
Gotcha.
There's this thing as absolute truth, and of course, is that absolute truth? That sort of thing. That's a good comeback. That's really not. That doesn't get you any further. All that does is maybe make them a little bit frustrated with you by pointing that out. A good God wouldn't send you to heaven. Wouldn't send you to hell. That's another one. That sort of sounds biblical because you're mentioning God, or even spiritual. But really, the problem is they're indicting God's character. A good God wouldn't send anyone to hell. So they're saying that's bad. Well, why is that bad? Based on what? Based on your standard?
Right.
Because
Gotcha.
people have different standards. So whose standard should we live by? Those types of things. Anything that's related to sexual behavior, of course, would be huge because people like to defend their own behavior, and they like to hide from that if it's pointed out that if you say, I think abortion is wrong, and they're pro-abortion, or maybe they've even had an abortion, they may be very sensitive to that and want to defend it more out of emotion than anything else.
Gotcha. So this is more. So the problem here ultimately is moral relativism. Is that what I'm hearing with this type of skepticism?
Right. That's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed at the start of this section you quoted John Lennon as saying, "All we're saying is give peace a chance," and you used the peace symbol to represent moral skepticism. What were you thinking there with peace somehow being tied into moral relativism?
Yeah, good question. The really what someone who is a moral relativist is essentially saying is, I'll do what I want to do, you do what you want to do, and let's not judge each other, and we'll all get along. So there will be peace and harmony if we just live and let live. But the problem is, what I want to do and what you want to do will eventually conflict. So then, who is the moral referee? Unless there is a moral referee, unless there is a fixed standard, then how this is going to be resolved is whoever is stronger. Might determines right.
Gotcha.
The strongest will survive. If I'm stronger, I'm eventually going to impose my view on you somehow, politically, economically, whatever that is, if I can. So it's might versus right, and that's not a very harmonious ultimate result.
No.
So they say they want peace, but the way they want it will never get them there. It will be really more enslaving than it would be liberating, because it would be might versus right instead of respect for a particular standard.
Right, which I guess is where you were saying in your book there is no such thing as a pure relativist, and you said that only those who pose as relativists in order to sound morally superior, politically correct. So based on what you said, like when you share that with them, how do you convey this to a moral relativist? Like, do you just say it as you said it to me, or if you do get them to that point of recognizing this, where do they usually go from there in the conversation?
If, like I was saying earlier, if you just point out that they're using self-defeating language, that may prove the point, but it may not earn you any credit with them. And I think a good way to say that is, look, I'm not playing word games with you here. That's just the way truth works. I have to live by it, and so do you. The difference is we have to both recognize that there is a truth that does exist. Whether you say you believe in absolute truth or not, you are holding something back. You are standing on some life standard, some moral standard, and that to you is an absolute. So, if you're sincere in what you say, that you want people to get along, then, hey, why don't we acknowledge that if we're going to get along, let's abide by the same standard. And then that's kind of a segue to, okay, you can't have a fixed standard unless there's a transcendent, objective standard.
Right.
So then you're going to run into some resistance with them there again. Most likely, if you suggest that, I believe, and there's nothing wrong with saying this, you can say, you can believe, you're welcome to disagree with me, but I believe that standard comes from a holy, personal, loving God. And those rules are not for us to, lose all the joy out of life. It's to free us. His objective is for our own good. So he's not some cosmic buzzkill out there by setting up rules.
Yeah.
He sets them up for our own good.
Like our parents give us laws out of love. They give us rules to follow for our betterment. And then
exactly.
When we have kids, we pass on rules too, because we love our children as well. Yeah, really good approach on that. And then the next type of skepticism was scientific skepticism. And I think I have a good example of what this sometimes plays out as. In the Jack Black movie, Nacho Libre, have you seen that movie?
I have not. I know which one you're talking about, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, so there's like a scene in there with his wrestling partner where the wrestling partner won't pray with him beforehand because he doesn't believe in God. And then the partner ends up pulling later like the whole, kind of pulls the moral card, but also then moves into the scientific one where it says, oh, you're always judging me because I only believe in science. Is that what this type of skepticism is, being skeptical of God because God can't be submitted to scientific testing?
I think that's part of it. Naturalism or materialism, believing that there is nothing but this world, the natural world is all that there is. But I think everyone believes in the supernatural one way or the other. And a scientifically minded person, of course, will resist that idea. But you go all the way back to the beginning. I mean, we can argue the ins and outs of evolution all you want, Big Bang Theory, quantum physics, all of that stuff. It comes down to first principles. You either believe in you either have an irrational faith that nothing is the cause of everything, and that violates all sorts of logical principles, or you believe that something with the power of being within itself, something that is non-contingent, started everything. That's also faith. Both sides have faith, but that is a logical, rational appeal to faith, because you're putting that cause in the hands of something capable of carrying it out. So it's sort of calling them on acknowledging that we're both using faith, and it's a very tough thing. My probing question there is, how much faith is required for that belief? And they will say, "What faith? I'm a scientist. I'm relying on science.
I have evidence."
That's right. Yes and no, but exactly. And evidence is an important word, because they'll say, I follow the evidence wherever it leads. But the point is, evidence doesn't lead. Evidence sits there and waits to be interpreted by someone who has a philosophical bias,
right,
or a worldview. And within that worldview, you're assuming things, especially if you're looking at things that happened in the past, like an evolved animal or the Big Bang or whatever it is. If you're looking into the past, then you can't witness it. You can't directly witness it. So you're resting your scientific calculations on some assumptions. And when you do that, when you're resting it on assumptions, that's where faith creeps in, because you're assuming some things based on your prior held beliefs. And so it's not denominational faith, but it's faith in the way that it's believing in something that you can't see. So it's in their worldview as well.
Yeah, it's really good. I actually really like this section on information as a red flag word on this one. I think I learned the most from that section. You shared that information isn't material, so they're basing their whole life on the material, or everything's physical or material. And you're like, well, information isn't, and information can't come from randomness. And then you showed how information on the DNA level can't produce new information, and that was the part that was really new to me. I didn't realize that, and I was just talking to a fellow teacher that teaches biology, and he was mentioning, that's absolutely true, and that information is only rearranged or degraded or both. So I think for me, that's one I really took away as a talking point with people on that one.
Right. That's sort of an intelligent design argument, and information is one of those things that a scientifically minded skeptic would borrow from a believer.
Right.
Even the belief that the universe has any order at all. Why should they believe that? It's
right.
all a matter of randomness and chance, and it shouldn't have this finely tuned aspect that it does. So they're borrowing that from us. They're assuming a lot of things to get their worldview started.
Right. They have to dip into the theistic worldview to even practice
That's right.
the scientific method, which is something you mentioned in there, that for them, they have to make nature do the supernatural. They're denying the supernatural, but they're making what's natural be supernatural by being able to produce life itself, which I just really love that section. So we're going to have to take a break now. So when we return, we'll look at the fourth type of skepticism in the book, which is the one that is my favorite to speak with people about, which is biblical skepticism. So when we return, we'll dig into biblical skepticism, and then from there, do some role play with Bill. I'll do my best to play as a skeptic and just see how he would respond to certain one-liners that we'll often probably hear from the world and the people that we interact with daily.
Reconnect us, O Lord,